We've probably all done it before. Ooh, gross. Not that. As I was saying, somewhere in your art journey, you've probably started a new sketchbook and it's filled with beautiful drawings and sketches. But then, one day you make a terrible drawing. It might be a watercolor or gouache fail, terrible pencil or line work. Maybe you really stuff up with acrylics. Whatever. It sucks. You hate it.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
So, what do? First, I'd like you to actually consider keeping it there. A lot of artists, particularly beginning artists, don't actually notice their gradual skill development. And if you look back on some of those earlier pieces, it can actually be super motivating to see how much you've improved. But sometimes you let that piece sit there and even months later, you still cringe when you see it. But don't worry, your art adventure boy's got you covered. Today, I'm going to explore with you how to take a monstrosity fail in your sketchbook, hopefully save it, and make it something that you actually want to look at and maybe even show other people. Let's go on an art adventure. This is an 8x5-inch watercolor sketchbook from Moleskine. I really dislike this sketch that I've done here. It's a fantasy landscape that I drew from my mind. Every time I look at it, it makes me cringe, so I've decided to cover it up. I'm using some acrylic gouache in white to cover that line work. If you have white acrylic paint, that's probably better, but acrylic gouache is an acrylic paint. Don't use gouache for this, it won't work. If you just want to cover the line works and start again on a white surface, obviously you'd probably need to layer that white paint a couple of times. But myself, I want to do something a little bit more interesting, for me anyway, and get some other acrylic paint. Firstly, this Liquitex acrylic gouache in deep turquoise, and also a gold from Neocolor by the Turner Company, and cover the page completely before I start sketching again. I'm using two different colors just to experiment. Obviously, if you want a uniform spread, just choose one color. It could be a good idea to cover completely by using a darker color, but if you want to work from white, once again, like I said, you'll just need to layer the white paint a couple of times, letting it dry between layers. But for me, I'm quite happy to have this deep turquoise and also the gold. I put 2 layers of the deep turquoise and got a really uniform shade. I probably should have done that with the gold, but I was a little bit lazy, and so it's ended up a little bit streaky. I'm then going in with a white pencil. It's a Van Gogh white pencil, but I found that I had to press quite hard to get any line works to show up. So I've switched to a Prismacolor white after doing this first image. And I'm also going around the outside borders with this white ink pen. I'm using this for the very first time. As you can see, I'm removing the ring and cracking the seal and getting the ink to flow. At first, I think the ink is flowing, but it's only just starting to flow, and so it's not very pigmented white. And then later on, from the other images that I'll do, you start to see that it actually is a very opaque and strong white ink, I guess. I'm not exactly sure what it's made of, but I suspect it's some sort of ink. I probably shouldn't have done this though. I probably should have just stuck with the pencil lines, because I end up going in with paint markers after I've got my images done and covering it all up. And so it ends up in some ways being a bit of a waste doing all that line work. But on the other hand, I've gotten to experiment and use this ink brush pen for the first time. And sketchbooks I think should be a place to experiment and to try things out. Sure, you can try to create some really nice pieces that you like, but you should also try out some different ideas and try new things with your sketchbook. Or at least I think you should. It's your sketchbook, you can do whatever you like with it. I just think that if you want to grow as an artist, you have to take some risks, and a sketchbook is the perfect place to do that. So what about the art itself? Well, you can see here that I'm starting to draw a few different Japanese toads. These are modified or very similar to some woodblock prints that I've found from Japan, and these are just different toads doing, I guess, what people back in the Edo time would have been doing, but instead of people, they're toads doing it. And so we see some people having fights, some people wrestling, some people being more like servants, or instead of people, I should say toads, I suppose. And you can also see on the other side, I guess they're toads that are dancing around and playing in a rainstorm. I was intending to draw rain at the beginning, or at some point during this piece, but by the time I finished doing the paint marker work, I decided that maybe trying to throw in some rain effects will make the piece look a little bit too busy. So maybe they just look like they're dancing around in the golden sunshine, I'm not sure. But either way, they look like some very happy toads. And why have I drawn so many toads? Well, first of all, almost everything in this sketchbook is inspired by something from Japan. Maybe they're plain on air sketches from places that I visited, or objects that I saw that I wasn't used to seeing while I lived in Japan and I wanted to remember them, or they're just motifs or artworks or other ideas or experiences that inspired me during my 8 years that I lived in Japan. The reason why I'm drawing toads, however, is thanks to another YouTube artist, Dena Tollefson. Dena is currently running a totally awesome challenge where she's encouraging as many YouTube artists as possible to draw toads or frogs in some sort of art style, however you want, whatever medium, whatever surface, whatever style of art you want to do, it's all up for grabs as long as it features toads or frogs. I strongly suspect that most people are going to do frogs. I could be wrong, but I think toads need a little bit of love, and I've just always loved Japanese toads. In my place where I worked in Japan, it was an international school, and there was this garden at the back that led down to the street by this kind of narrow cliff sort of walkway with these extensive gardens. And anytime it just slightly rained, these massive Japanese bullfrogs would start bursting out from everywhere. There was very little space for them to all be living, but somehow there would be dozens of them. And these guys were seriously big. I mean, 2 hands or bigger. And this is right in the middle of Tokyo. They always blew my mind, not only for their size and the sounds that they would make, but that they were just kind of so chill, and they would just sit there even if you were about to step on them. So you actually had to be really quite careful if it was rainy, particularly if you're going to work before the sun came up or after dark and there was some rain about. You really had to be careful you weren't going to step on one of these guys and squash them or slip over or both. And so every time I think of toads now, I just think of those Japanese toads from my workplace in Japan. And I love these motifs of woodblocks and animals that are doing human-like things. That's a very popular sort of art style in Japan, not just for toads, but all sorts of different animals doing human-type everyday things. And I just think that they're so cute and derpy that I just couldn't resist jumping on board with this challenge and drawing some of these toads of my own. And in terms of how I'm approaching it, I needed to cover up the monstrosity that was underneath all of this, so I'm using acrylic paint markers. A variety of Posca pens that I received in some recent art subscription boxes, and also some Crink markers and some Molotow markers. They're all basically the same. They're acrylic paint in a pen, and once you shake it up and push down on the nib, the paint begins to flow out of this felt nib, and you can basically just draw with acrylic paint like it was a pen. Some of them are very fine, some of them are very thick. You can get all sorts of different widths. They're really fun to play with. If you haven't tried them before, Posca pens are probably the most well-known ones. Probably all of you know these very well, and I don't need to be explaining it, but just in case I thought I should. And I'm really enjoying this black fine tip Posca to do the detail work. I think this might be the only fine tip Posca that I own. All of my other Poscas are quite thick tipped, and so I'm very lucky that I had this black one for the line work, but I guess that's a challenge for pretty much every artist to deal with, trying to use the art supplies that you actually have and trying to think about creative ways to use the ones that you have, because I actually only have a handful of different paint markers. So I hope that you've enjoyed watching my totally awesome challenge. Thank you so much to Dena Tollefson for coming up with this great idea. I'm so excited to see what the other artists have come up with. I'll put a link to the playlist down below, and I really encourage you to check out not only Dena's channel and her totally awesome challenge piece, but all the other artists that have taken part in this. And she said that she'll add other people if they add them after the due date of September 6th, so feel free to join in whenever you can. And I'll see you guys soon for another art adventure. Remember, create more and consume less. Oh, and of course, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share, hit that notification bell, all that good stuff. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.